All right. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining me. My name is Tama. I'm your host, and welcome to African Voice. Today, my guest name is Taye Uhuru. He is the writer of the book, The Afro Set. Taye, welcome.
Greetings, Queen. Thank you so much for inviting me on your platform. I truly appreciate you.
Sure, you're welcome. And what city are you based? What state are you based in? I was just
I'm from
curious.
Cleveland, Ohio.
Cleveland, Ohio. Okay. Well, first, can you tell me a little bit about where you grew up and, a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, definitely. I grew up in Cleveland. I primarily lived on the east side. I lived in the inner city and the suburbs of Cleveland.
Uh-huh.
Um, lately I've been doing a lot of world traveling. I've been to almost 70 countries,
Oh,
almost
wow.
20 countries in Africa. I'm a
Okay.
historian, a genealogist, so.
Okay. That's good. That's cool. So tell me, why did you decide to write this book?
Okay, the Afro set. Yeah, as I
Yes.
mentioned, I'm into history and genealogy. So
Mm-hmm.
um, I've been doing a lot of family research, tracing my
Okay.
roots, the last 20 years, 10 years. So
Mm-hmm.
when I got to my uncle, I found an abundance of information and history that a lot of people didn't really talk about. So that's when I began my journey to, start writing about him and the impact
Mm-hmm.
that he had on the city of Cleveland.
Mm-hmm. Did you feel like in some way you had to continue his work after he passed?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, that came more so after, I was able to do research. I sat down with a lot of elders and a lot of his comrades. I did a
Mm-hmm.
lot of interviews. I found a lot of old newspaper articles, with my uncle
Okay.
on the cover of, newspapers and things like that. It really, really inspired me and motivated me to do more.
What did your mom tell you about your uncle when you were growing up? What were some of the things that she talked about?
She always spoke highly of him. She
Mhm.
always talked about how he loved poetry, he loved music, he loved Black people and Black history, you know.
In your book, you talk about the Cleveland Memory Project, and you have a lot of photos in the book, which, by the way, I have a copy, and it is right here. It has a lot of stickers on it because I
Thank
have
you, thank you.
because I have read it, and it's a very good book. You talk about the Cleveland Project. Can you talk about your process when you were trying to obtain these photos? Did you have a hard time? What was that process like?
Well, as far as the Cleveland Memory Project, it's like a digital database that
Okay.
contains a lot of pictures throughout Cleveland's history. And they had a
Okay.
few photos from the time period that I was particularly interested in. So to
Hmm.
actually get them offline, that process wasn't really hard. But
Okay.
to get more photos of my uncle and his group, I had to dig a little bit deeper. I had to
Hmm.
actually meet people and they'll go in their attic and then be like, oh, let me see what I could find. And then they would
Uh-huh.
pull out different things. And then, some places I had to go out of town to get pictures. I had
Oh,
to,
wow. So were
yeah,
people asking you questions about, well, what do you want these pictures for? What are you trying to do with them? Were they like inquisitive about what you were doing?
yeah, definitely. When I first reached out, they was like, what's going on? But then once I told them who my uncle was, then they
Hmm.
was like, oh, anything you need, yeah, I'll definitely help you. It was nothing but love. Nobody really gave me a hard time. And,
Hmm.
without them, I couldn't have even, wrote the book. They actually suggested that I write the book because when I first started, I wasn't trying to write a book. Like I said, I
Hmm.
was just doing my family's history and researching and adding information. But they was like, we want you to write a book about this.
Oh, so the people suggested that you wrote a book about it, is what you're saying.
Yeah, definitely my uncle, his comrades and friends.
Uh-huh. Okay. That's cool. Um, any part of was any part of the book difficult for you to write, you would
I
say?
wouldn't say it wasn't difficult to write at all. It just was
Hmm.
starting was the hardest part because all of the things that I wrote about I wasn't really familiar with. So it was like I was learning and writing at the same time. So and I just had
So you kind of
this.
had to do a lot of research. Like, where did you get your research? What kind of research did you have to do to come up with all these? I also noticed that you talked about the most recent. You started with the old. You talked about what do you call them? The oh, I'm having a memory block.
The Great Migration.
The Great Migration. You talked about the Black Panthers Party. You talked about those, and then you also bring it back to today. You talked about George Floyd. So, can you talk about how you kind of put those together in the book?
Yeah, definitely, because I think that I'm talking about a subject that a lot of people are not familiar with. So I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to kind of show how did we get to the point where we needed a group for self-defense and Black nationalism and groups like the Afro Set and the Black Panthers.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't just want to start out of thin air like, okay, this is my uncle and this is what he did. I wanted
Right.
to show that from the time that African Americans were so-called free from slavery, you know what I'm saying, through the 1910s, the 1920s, the
Mm-hmm.
1930s, the 1940s, they
Right.
repeatedly were oppressed. They were repeatedly murdered and destroyed and disenfranchised. So
Mm-hmm.
then when I got to my uncle's time period, you could see why they were doing the things that they were doing. You
Right.
understand? And then I went into, today's events so people can um, draw similarities to what's
Mm-hmm.
happening to Black people. Is it really that much different?
So, for example, in the Huff neighborhood, there was a lot of, police brutality happening, as we see in most of, this country now, even with the riots that happened during George Floyd and things of that nature. You live in Cleveland right now. What is the place like now after all of this, since all this time has passed?
I still live in the same neighborhood. The streets that I was writing about, Superior, Huff, and Wade Park, that's the
Mm-hmm.
area that I live in. So
Right.
there's still a lot of poverty. There's still a lot of lack of education, lack of opportunities. There's still a lot of crime. But the
Mm-hmm.
seventh ward, we got a new councilman, and he's been, taking a lot of steps to move the ward forward.
Mm-hmm.
A lot more economical opportunities and things like that. You see a lot of new houses that have been built in the last 20, 40 years, to replace
Mm-hmm.
the dilapidated buildings. Some of those buildings, that were destroyed during the Huff Rebellion, the Huff riots in the
Mm-hmm.
1960s. So some of the area is still, very poverty stricken.
I know they were one of the things that the Afro Set members did was really try to open, they had a youth center to help the kids, develop so that no kids are in the street playing around and things like that. Or are those type of centers still in Cleveland? Do you see these type of places around
Not
still?
so much, not like how the Afro set was doing it, where they're getting, Afrocentric education and reinforcement
Mm-hmm.
and encouragement to be proud and Black. I mean, you do have, like a YMCA or a Boys and Girls Club. You have,
Mm-hmm.
you see those sometimes, but
Right. Not as much. I see. Can you talk about your process for what kind of tips would you give somebody that is looking to write a book? Doesn't have to be a book about, it can be just any book about any topic. What was your process from start to finish? How long did it take you to write it too?
man, if I could give you some advice, if you're gonna write a book, write about something that you're very, very passionate about because it's gonna
Uh-huh.
overtake your life. You're
Mm-hmm.
gonna have to become obsessed with the things that you are writing about. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? You're gonna have to spend every day writing about this, especially if it's a historical account. You're gonna have to do research. You're gonna have to contact people. You cannot leave no stone unturned. So you got to
Right.
call people. You got to
Mm-hmm.
email people. Like I was trying to get permission to use some of the photographs that were used in the Call and Post newspaper. I had to call them almost a year. You know what I'm saying? And I didn't give up, and I eventually got their permission to use these papers. So you got to
Oh
be
wow.
very persistent.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to when I talked about the Cleveland project too. I was wondering about that because I know, but you said it was online and then you were able to get retrieve things pretty quickly. I'm also aware that you do different camps that you take trips to Africa. Can you talk about those?
Yeah, definitely. I currently do educational tours to Africa. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, the tours are to clear up a lot of misconceptions that African Americans have about Africa and African people. We
Mm-hmm.
currently have about 6 or 7 tours. We go to Senegal, Ghana, Cape Verde, South Africa,
Mm-hmm.
Kenya, Ethiopia, Egypt, so each tour is totally different. Africa is very, very diverse. It's the most genetically diverse continent in the world.
Right.
Africa has more countries than any other continent in the world. The most beautiful beaches, the most beautiful animals, the most beautiful people, the most beautiful landscapes, and a lot of African
Absolutely.
Americans and Americans in general, they're not familiar with that side of Africa because they tend to look at it as one place.
If somebody wanted to book a tour, how do they reach you? How do they contact you? They wanted to go on the tours. And right now with the coronavirus happening, are you still doing those tours right now?
Definitely. If anybody is interested in the tours or my book, or they need any additional information, I have a website. It's campcleveland.org.
Okay.
campcleveland.org. And
Mm-hmm.
also, I'm on social media. I'm on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and
Okay.
Facebook as Camp Cleveland.
You said Camp Cleveland on all the social
Yes.
medias as well. Okay. Is there any other things that you would like to share with us about your book?
Yeah, definitely. I would just like people to know that, the Afro set, it was more family orientated. A lot of times when we think of the Black Power movement, we recognize the militancy side of it. The
Mm-hmm.
Afro set, they trained with rifles, they trained with machetes, they trained, physical combat and things like that. But a lot of the members, they were brothers and sisters. You
Mm-hmm.
had mothers that brought their kids into the Afro set. People married in the Afro set. Babies were born into the Afro set. They had a lot of social programs. They opened up nurseries.
Mm-hmm.
They opened up a theater. You know, they brought uh, they brought African history to Cleveland, African
Uh,
language. They taught people Swahili. African dancing, African drumming. Things like that. They had classes on economics, diabetes, sickle cell, things like that. My uncle, he actually helped the Black Panthers build their health clinic. He
mm-hmm.
donated money. He volunteered some of his soldiers to help, clean it out and paint it and fix it up. They established a drug rehabilitation program. They did a lot of positive things in the community. When pimps came into the community to take advantage of Black women, they would run them out. When drug dealers came into Huff to sell
Yeah, I
drugs,
remember
they
reading
would
about
run them
those.
out.
Yep, yep.
Yeah, so it was a lot of confrontations, even with the police. If the police were brutalizing people, they would
Mm-hmm.
confront them. So it was a lot of excitement in the book as well, shootouts, rebellions, and much
Mm-hmm.
more.
And it's amazing to see how, when I was reading this book, the things that were happening back in that time still are happening today. I mean, there has been some change,
Definitely.
but in terms of that brutality, hasn't really changed. How has your life changed since you wrote this book?
I feel like a great sense of accomplishment. Like, I did it. I took my place in history,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's just in terms of Cleveland, you know what I'm saying? Because I would say this in comparison to my peers, which are people that wrote about similar subjects, as far
Mm-hmm.
as the 1960s, the civil rights movement in the city
Mm-hmm.
of Cleveland. A lot of them are old enough to be my father, old enough to be my
Mm-hmm.
grandfather. The people that wrote about this same subject were mayors, congressmen,
Mm-hmm.
lawyers, professors. These people had assistants, they had money, they had publishing, they got degrees, they got offices, they got secretaries, they got assistants. And I did it independently. So,
Right. Yeah, that's really commendable. When you were younger, what kind of books did you read growing up? Like when
definitely.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is at what point did you I would say awaken? How old were you when you kind of felt like there's something else out there, there's something different?
Well, I don't know. It kind of runs in my family. Like I said, my uncle, he was doing it in the 60s. And then in the
Mm-hmm.
1920s, my great grandparents, they migrated to Cleveland from Georgia, from Atlanta, and they joined the UNIA. They were followers of Marcus Garvey. And my grandmother told me these things when I was young. You
Mm-hmm.
understand? So, she said, my dad said that we were Africans and we should move back to Africa. She told me
Mm-hmm.
about the Marcus Garvey parades and the raising
Right.
of the red, black, and green flag. So I kind of heard some of those things early on, although I didn't really experience them. When I heard about my uncle, my mom told me about my uncle. And my mom, she gave me my first Black history book, Black history from A to Z. So I really always admired Black history, Black people, African people, and I
Mm-hmm.
read children's books as well, Goosebumps and the Bernstein Bears and Dr. Seuss like
Mm-hmm.
everybody else. You know what I'm
Right,
saying? I was
right.
a normal childhood.
Uh-huh. Okay. Wow. That's pretty cool. Um, Anything else you would like to share with us
I think he
about?
pretty much covered everything.
Yeah.
I could let people know that I do music too. I'm an MC. I
Okay.
have music videos on YouTube.
Okay.
My last song I did is called "Do Revolutionaries Go to Heaven." That's a song that I wrote, I recorded, and I filmed.
What is your YouTube page for the music?
Camp Cleveland.
Okay, Camp Cleveland. Okay.
Yeah, so that's a song that I wrote,
Mm-hmm.
recorded, filmed in South Africa. I was living in South Africa during the lockdown in 2020. Um, I lived in a community. I lived in Johannesburg, the city of Joburg, and I
Okay.
stayed in a community called Maboneng, and it's a very, very unique place. It's like an art district.
Mm-hmm.
I never seen a place like this because a lot of rappers, singers, dancers, poets, painters, photographers, producers, writers, they all
Mm-hmm.
live in this area, so they can, the apartment I was living in, it'll be a singer that lives next door to me, a rapper
Right.
upstairs, a musician downstairs, things like that. I had a lot of people around me. And when I would go outside, they had a lot of murals of great African leaders, people like Malcolm X,
Mm-hmm.
Nelson Mandela, Harriet Tubman, things like that. And that really motivated me and uplifted me,
Right.
despite the chaos that was going on in the world. So that's why I wrote the song, Do Revolutionaries Go to Heaven. So that's my latest song.
Got you. When you're in Africa and you're moving around, how is it different um, being there and just living there on a daily basis versus in the United States? What is that feeling like for you?
It's almost indescribable. I mean, it's something that you would have to experience for yourself. I mean, the
Hmm.
removal of the racial oppression is the number one thing. So if you can imagine, say you go to Ethiopia, you flying on Ethiopian Airways, it's a black airline. The flight attendants are black. The
Hmm.
pilot is black. You go to the airport named after somebody black. The baggage handlers are black. Taxi driver is black. You go to the ATM, you take the money out the machine. The people on the money are black. You driving down the street named after a black person. The president is black. The police is black. The
Hmm.
firefighters are black. So I think that's a extraordinary feeling. And
Hmm.
even just living in other parts of Africa, like say even South Africa, it's a little bit more diverse. Um,
Okay.
it's still not the same amount of racial tension. You know what I'm saying?
Right, right, absolutely. Well, for anybody who's interested, again, here's the book. It's called The Afro Set. Please get yourself a copy. And I thank you for coming on and sharing with me your story. And I appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Queen. I truly appreciate you and I admire what you're doing. Please keep up the good work.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So yeah, this was African Voice. Please, like I said, feel free to like, share, and subscribe. That way you get notified when a new video is uploaded. And we'll see you next time.